And then lastly, the presentation you'll see tonight will also be put onto the website, and we'll let you know where that is as well. So along with me, as I mentioned, Stan Edwards with the county is going to be making a presentation. There's a number of others, participants from the county. Dan Sheridan is on today. Let's see, Anna Ariaza, who is on and helping with the Zoom meeting. Khalid, let's see, Khalid Afsal is on as part of the county team. Let's see, who else from the county that I'm missing? Adriana Hochberg, and I'm not sure who else from the county is on. And then there's a number of folks from the consultant team. Mentioned myself, Paul Moyer, Miranda Santucci, who will be making the presentation, Dan Spiker, Lawrence Vandertok, Olivia Foster, Ben Carlson, and Hung Trung, who will also be who's also with the consultant team. So there's quite a few of us to help facilitate and answer questions. So if you basically go to the next slide, Hung, I'm going to turn it over to Stan to provide some more background on this study.
Thank you, Paul. Again, my name is Stan Edwards. I'm with the Montgomery County Department of Environmental Protection and part of the county's core planning team that's helping get this project off the ground. So I'm going to provide just a few slides on the background of why we're doing the comprehensive flood management plan, and then the Miranda Santucci from Jacobs will go into a little more detail about some background information on flooding, its causes, and how we'll go about looking at some things that we're studying as part of this first phase of this plan development. If you could go to the next slide, please. So why do we need a comprehensive flood management plan? I think all of us are probably familiar with flooding events in Montgomery County over the past few years, and certainly in other areas of the country and around the world. Flooding seems to be becoming a more recurrent problem, and it's not just a few inches of water in the streets now. We're really getting significant damage, and even in the county, we've had a young man who died last year during a flooding event. These flooding situations are projected to worsen due to climate change and continued urban development. What we're seeing now is more intense storms over shorter periods of time, and Miranda's going to go into more detail about that. But this will continue to be a problem in the county, and we need to get a better handle on how we're comprehensively addressing it across all the relevant departments in the county. These pictures here just show a few examples of recent storm events that created flooding situations in the county. Next slide, please, Hung. So the comprehensive flood management plan will help us develop solutions to minimize the risk of not only the current flooding we're seeing, but also future flood risk as climate change continues and worsens the conditions that lead to flooding. It's a detailed study that will allow us to map flooded areas for a range of current conditions, but also conditions that we expect to occur in the years ahead as climate change continues to become more of a problem. It will allow us to do a risk assessment of vulnerable populations, homes, businesses, critical facilities, and infrastructure, so we know what areas we should prioritize to try to protect and minimize the impact on. And it will help us develop some alternatives for solutions that might be able to mitigate the risk that we face. It's likely that we won't be able to eliminate flooding, but we can hopefully minimize the risk, ensure that people are better prepared for a flooding event and are able to recover more easily from a flooding event. Next slide, please. So our approach to the development of the flood management plan is it's a three-phase process. We're in phase one right now, which started last spring, and we'll wrap up first part of next year, early 2023. And this first phase is really to understand our current organizational approach to flooding and identify some recommended changes. And by organizational approach, I mean what departments are involved in addressing flooding issues, what staffing do we have, what budgets, what data do we have about flooding, what data don't we have about flooding that we should collect in order for us to better understand the situation. And the consultant team led by Jacobs will give the county a report with some recommendations based on what they have researched and spending a lot of time talking to the county about what we currently do, and also benchmarking what other jurisdictions in the area have done. Jacobs has done a lot of work with local jurisdictions like Montgomery County on flooding, so that expertise will be helpful for us going forward to try to figure out if there are things we should do to change our approach. Then in phase 2, we'll start to do detailed studies of risk assessment and alternatives that might be implemented to minimize risk. And that process will take, we have a time frame here, 2 to 3 years. These time frames are dependent on lots of things like the availability of data and funding and staffing. But we think that phase 2 shall take in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 years. And in phase 3, we'll start to implement alternatives to minimize risk from flooding. And the time frame to do that will vary. Also, we expect there to be a lot of projects that may be suggested from our risk assessments and alternatives analysis that we will want to implement over a number of years ahead. We always talk about the city of Alexandria in Northern Virginia. Jacobs did work in that jurisdiction. They're a few years ahead of us in the timing of what they're doing, but they've identified a first set of climate projects, of flood projects that will cost about $170 million as our initial cost estimate. That's likely to go up as they get more detailed designs done, and that's scheduled to occur over the next 10 years. So that's a fair amount of time and money for jurisdictions. That's 15 square miles. Montgomery County is 500 square miles, although not all the county is developed as Alexandria or as the western northern part of the county in the ag reserve, for example, not as developed as the lower portions of the county. So we likely won't have to do detailed studies and analysis of all 500 square miles of the county, but considerably more than Alexandria. So that gives you some idea of the order of magnitude of the time frame and the cost of doing this project. Next slide, please. So why are we having this particular session and doing other outreach and engagement sessions with the community? We want to understand how people are impacted by flooding in the county, what their past experiences with flooding. We want to help residents understand the causes of flooding so they can be better prepared. This will help us prioritize our future work to implement solutions to minimize flooding. And we're doing this through this session. Other engagement events we'll have as we move forward with this project, we'll start to do watershed-based assessments and have more outreach events in individual watersheds. We also have a survey that is currently available on the flooding website, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. And we've been publicizing that survey in a variety of different ways. Anna just put the link to the flooding website in the chat. You can see the survey on that link. That survey it's published in 7 languages, including English, but it will hopefully allow people to give us information about their experiences, specifically where they live with flooding or where they work. And again, that'll help us. That information will help us to be one of the inputs into helping us prioritize where we might want to do work initially. But we will eventually be studying every area of the county where we think flooding might be a potential concern. So that's a little background here. I'm going to turn it over to Miranda now, who's going to talk a little bit more about causes of flooding and some of the detailed work we're going to be doing in this study.
Great, thank you, Stan. Hung, if you can advance to the next slide, please. Thanks, and the next one, just keep going. So we'll take a little bit of time to just talk about some of the terminology related to stormwater, just to, as we move, so that we're on the same page as we move forward with the other slides. Before I get into it though, I'm Miranda Santucci. I am with Jacobs, and we are an engineering company based out of Silver Spring, Maryland. And I am a county resident too, so very excited to work on this project, something that's close to home. So firstly, we may all be on the same page about this particular slide, but what do we mean by stormwater? Stormwater, as it might suggest, is raw water that during a storm event, the rainfall can be absorbed into the ground through infiltration. However, if the surface that the rainfall falls onto is impervious, not allowing the water to infiltrate, it will run off, and it will run off into infrastructure that is designed to manage it, downspouts on the house, inlets, swales, catch basins, eventually drainage pipes and outlets and outfalls, as pictured in the front of the picture there from California Caltrans. In Montgomery County, the sewers are separated. That is, the storm sewers are collecting rainfall runoff drainage, outfalling to rivers and streams. Sewage is carried in a separate pipe network. Other areas, there's areas of DC, for example, where there's a combined sewer system. That is not the case in Montgomery County. It's totally separated. So next slide, Hung. So just to mention the different ways in which flooding happens, can happen either driven by rainfall or by coastal forces, tidal flooding, sea level rise, that sort of thing. Montgomery County is only subject to rainfall driven flooding, but other jurisdictions not that far away, DC, Virginia, Anne Arundel County, Prince George's County, they do have tidal influence, surge, sea level rise influence for flooding in those areas. But for Montgomery County, we're talking about riverine and pluvial, or what we call urban flooding. So the first one there, pluvial or urban flooding, that is flooding caused by intense rainfall exceeding the capacity of a local drainage network. And it's causing exceedance of the inlet capacity. The water cannot get into the storm drain system fast enough, or the storm drain system is over capacity and cannot accept more rainfall runoff. That's what we term pluvial or urban flooding. And the term urban is a bit misleading. It's not intended to imply that this just happens in city areas. It does not. It happens wherever there is built environment, buildings, and there are storm drain systems. It can happen in rural and urban areas too, depending on the circumstances. The other vector is riverine in nature, and that is when a stream or river overtops the channel and expands out into the overbank area. So as rainfall accumulates in the drainage area, as the water level increases in that stream or river channel, it causes more regional flooding, like as pictured in there. You can see the bridge in the background. The flooding is extending into a parking area there on the overbank area. So those are our vectors of flooding in Montgomery County. So next slide, please, Hung. Okay, I'll just take a moment to talk about floodplain, because that's a term that we hear a lot in the flood management realm. So floodplain is an area adjacent to a stream or river, and it's expected to flood when the water levels rise. The graphic there is a really nice one from Oregon, actually. So it's showing the normal channel there with the blue. The floodplain is that expansive section over to each side of it. That's where the river would be expected to flood into for a certain return period storm. So Federal Emergency Management Administration definition of the floodplain is the area inundated by the 1% annual chance storm. That's the storm with the statistical probability of happening once a year, annual recurrence of once a year, otherwise known as a 100-year storm. So that would be the FEMA definition of a floodplain. And the county definition, as far as the number of streams it can generate, a floodplain is more expansive. So the county defines areas inundated by that 100-year storm for any stream channel with a drainage area of 30 acres or more. So FEMA has a more limited size of drainage area that they would look at. The county definition is a bit more expansive there, but we're just talking about riverine flooding areas when we're talking about floodplain. It's really those areas around the stream and river channels. So next slide, please. Okay, and as far as the information the county currently has on flood hazard areas, the information depicted in this map is a combination of, in the blue, you can see the FEMA 100-year floodplain. So that's what would be associated with the National Flood Insurance Program, flood insurance studies. They've, I think the latest revision of that was 2006, but they're in an update process now, fairly expansive throughout the county. They're also in green. Those are county studies, so studies that have occurred through the county floodplain district permit process, or historic parks and planning studies that have also generated that 100-year floodplain. Those are depicted in green. So those are the areas that we have some good flood hazard information on in the county. And again, the point here is that these are really focused on riverine flood hazard areas. So they're really mapping that one type of vector of flooding or mechanism of flooding in the county. So next slide, please. Okay, so why is flood risk changing? We'll spend a minute to just talk about some of the drivers for changes in flood risk. The first one you're probably familiar with, of course, increased urbanization can have an impact on flood risk, and that's just because of, as we mentioned before, an increase in impervious area will increase the volumes associated with any given storm event. This image is from Maryland Department of Planning land use land cover data set, where they use satellite imagery to classify land use. It's a little bit dated, but you can see there the peach is the area that has been developed for quite some time in Montgomery County. The darker orange that they have termed as new developments, not really that new, 1973 through 2010. That's area that has also been quite developed, but you can see there as the development increases throughout the county, we're getting that increase in impervious area associated with that. It's not depicted here, but as these areas develop, there'd be an increase in impervious area. And the other thing that is not clear from this image, because it's just a classification of land use, but those areas to the south are always seeing renewal, redevelopment, infill development, that sort of thing. So it's a changing landscape, but it is one of the drivers for increased flooding. So next slide, please. The other one, of course, is aging infrastructure. This is not unique to Montgomery County, certainly a challenge across the nation. What's depicted here, there's a culvert there showing one potential mode of failure for a drainage pipe, but the headline there is just a recent example of the pretty significant disruption that this sort of failure can occur. So the image up there on the top is a repair occurring on 270 that took some time, and I'm sure it was a challenge for State Highway and DOT to manage. So next slide. And the third one is climate change. The image here on the right is from the NOAA Multi-Radar Multi-Sensor Operational Product Viewer. And we included that to try to illustrate the increase in high intensity storms that are highly variable and very localized high intensity rainfall events. So that that output is from a 3-hour rainfall, September 10th, 2010, very high intensity event in those areas that are shown in red. So the pictures there are from one of my colleagues' properties there, where you can see some pretty significant impacts during that event. Certainly road flooding, got a manhole pop there, lots of flooding on the property. But those out to the east here or even west may not have noticed much impact at all. It's a totally different storm situation for them. So this sort of rainfall event quickly exceeds the capacity of the installed infrastructure, even assuming it is in good condition. So next slide, please. And we anticipate this to continue to worsen. The graph here is just showing projections done for a 100-year 24-hour storm. So that's that 1% annual recurrence storm with a 24-hour duration used for certain design reasons. And the bars are just showing an increase in the projection. So in the gray bar, which is our current condition, we're at about 8.5 inches for that event. And as we get through 2040 in the blue, 2065 in the dark green, and up to 2100 in the bright green, you can see about a little bit over a 20% increase up to 10.6 inches at that point. So these are pretty significant increases in that time period. Next slide, please. Okay, so we'll go through a couple graphics just to further illustrate how we've seen this flood risk change in the county before we summarize and talk a little bit more about what we'd like to talk about for the rest of the meeting. So next slide, please. Okay, so we put together these graphics and they're intended to be a bit like Google Maps. So the green is the undeveloped land, the gray roads there are the lines, and the little gray shapes there are the buildings. So this first one is pretty simple. We're showing like a pre-development or perhaps a current up-county condition, or what was probably the case mid-county not that long ago. Before significant development, the stream channels are largely intact through there. You just see a bridge over there, but otherwise, the natural waterways are really not impeded. So next slide. So during early development, you can see, whoops, sorry, there we go. Some energy savings there. You see to the right, we're showing a little catch basin there. And you can see that the nice rainfall there is our typical historic rainfall. That's what the system was designed for, with an adequate excess capacity. See the inlet there, the pipe has sufficient capacity during that typical rainfall event. And if you hit the arrow forward again, Hung, what we want to note is those stream channels have been channelized, put under the ground in drainage pipes to accommodate the development of the land, the subdivision of the land. And you can see how there's some inlets placed that are contributing to those drainage pipes. So next slide, please. So during a heavy rainfall event, the rain's coming down a little bit harder on that catch basin. There's still capacity there. If you hit forward again one more time, some areas of flooding, but it's in the channel areas. The design system is adequate to address this condition. So next slide, please. So a current development, we've added a lot more houses, as you can see. Increase impervious area certainly decreases infiltration, increases the runoff volumes. So during that heavy rainfall condition that's depicted at the right, you can see some exceedance at the inlet, which is what we're also showing in the streets there. The other thing to note is as the development increases, you're getting storm drains added onto that existing system. So more inlets contributing, more concentration into that system. So if you hit forward again, Hung. And there's also redevelopment, as I mentioned before, infill, larger homes replacing smaller ones, just further increasing the impervious on each individual property that's contributing to that drainage network. So next slide, please. And that's highlighting the runoff from those areas where you see the runoff exceeding the older system capacity. Next slide, please. And finally, our current development, we have our climate change situation there. So just heavier or more intense rainfall, more high intensity events, short duration, high intensity events. Those clearly exceeding the capacity of the design system, showing some more of that urban flooding. If you hit forward again, more of that, those areas where individual roads or lots are seeing an impact due to this kind of flooding. So next slide, please. So I'll end on this slide. The comprehensive flood management plan is really intended to expand our understanding of flood risk, to fill that understanding of both the pluvial and the riverine mechanisms of flooding throughout the county. So the objective is to understand the risk in the county neighborhoods, use that information to identify solutions and mitigate the risk in an equitable way. And the link there is just to reiterate what Stan mentioned before. Really want your help to inform the understanding of past flood impacts. We have this survey, it's going to be online for a while, so please share out and fill out the survey when you have a moment. Next slide, Hung. I believe Stan is going to help me finish out. Oops, Stan, you're on mute.
I think after years of doing Zoom calls, I'd figure out that I'm on mute. Thank you, Miranda, for that very instructive lesson on flooding. I just want to summarize here before we get into answering questions people may have. Obviously, we're anticipating flood risk to worsen and affect more residents in the future. That's why we're embarking on this plan. This is a complex problem, involves a variety of infrastructure issues, so it will not be a simple thing to fix, but it's an important thing to fix. I want to emphasize this is the beginning of the process to address flooding on a countywide basis. We're going to be involved in this for a number of years ahead. And we're also going to be engaging with residents in multiple ways as we go forward. As we develop specific studies or projects, we'll be interacting with residents at a more local level, have plenty of opportunity for them to provide input and understand what projects, studies and projects may be going on. We have developed this new flooding website where people can stay connected on what we're doing. The website you'll see now as you go, the address is at the bottom of the slide, is a pretty basic one, just has some general information about flooding, talks about these events we're doing, but also things like flood insurance, frequently flooded roadways. And we will update this as we move into the project phase. We will update this. This will become the host website for learning about individual projects as we go forward. And most importantly, this plan will give the county a way to address flooding in a technically sound and equitable manner. We want to make sure that we're letting science guide what we do. And we also want to make sure we're addressing the needs of the most vulnerable residents of the county. Not everyone is as engaged as perhaps some of you on the call this evening, but they still are going to have flooding problems, and we need to make sure that we address their concerns as well. So I just saw a question from Karen come up in the chat here. So we on the slide, you'll see a slide here in a few more slides. We summarize some more of this information about the outreach. It says the survey will be closed on October 28th. We would like people to respond by October 28th, but we will make keep the survey open for longer than that. Jacobs will use some of the survey results as part of their report to the county. And so that's why we want to try to get as much information as we can before the end of October. We will make the survey results available to the public. It certainly will be some results in the Jacobs study that we expect to get in January, but we can continue to update that information that we get so people will know what we're hearing from the community. That's another thing I should emphasize. We want to be very transparent in this process so that people have a full understanding of what we're doing and how we're trying to address this problem. So now we're into questions. I already see one hand raised. So Ken, do you have a?
Yeah, maybe before we jump into the questions, Stan, let me just
Sure.
a couple things. One, you might just go ahead and click over to those 5 questions just to put it on the screen, just as to let people think about. So yeah, I think start with, yeah, we're interested in hearing your questions. Obviously, just when you go off mute, ask your questions, and we'll do our best to answer those. The other option, obviously, which we've already done, is you can put your questions in the chat, and we'll try to answer those as well as we go along. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and, stand up, go and ask Ken for him. Ken has his hand up. Go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks. Hi, Stan. Nice to see you.
Okay.
So hopefully, is the county looking at controlling stormwater outside of the stream valleys to avoid doing more of these destructive stream restorations?
We're looking at flooding outside stream valleys because there will be problems there, whether stream restorations factor into this or not. I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, we do stream restorations. I know they're controversial. Not everyone agrees that's a good approach. That's primarily a water quality issue, not a water quantity issue. So I don't think we'll be doing stream restorations as part of a water quantity control measure. Not sure that answers your question, but
thanks for those comments, Dan.
okay.
Do the others have either general questions or any maybe clarifications from the presentation? Karen, you have another question?
Yeah, hi, thank you very much. So
Yep.
I'm so pleased that you're doing this study. Thank you to Jacobs and to the county, Stan, and the team. This is great. And I know it'll take a while, and I know that there's the solution is expensive and long-term. Meanwhile, will you use the results of the survey to start thinking through some interim solutions? Like just as an example, not to say that this is the solution, but as an example, if you find that there's a neighborhood that's having a lot of pluvial flooding, would you be considering rejiggering your county programs to specifically address that area? For example, the rain garden program, if you were to do on more of a sub-watershed scale, an area that is having a lot of flooding, and if you tackle it in a whole neighborhood, it might provide more benefit than property by property. Now, that just is one example, but so the question is really, will you be like, in the interim, rethinking how you can address some of these known areas that are problematic?
Yeah, I think, Karen, as you know, we're always rethinking programs and what we might be able to do better. Rainscapes is a program, if people aren't familiar with it, a program in the Department of Environmental Protection, where we try to encourage people to use natural solutions that will absorb stormwater and minimize the amount that's running off. Rain gardens can certainly be a solution to some runoff situations, but aren't going to solve major intense runoff, but they can certainly help. We also work closely with the Department of Transportation in certain neighborhoods where they do drainage assistance reviews. So they go in and check storm drain systems to make sure they're functioning as they're designed. It could be an issue where they're just not designed for the kind of storms we're experiencing now, or storms that may occur. So we will continue to look at those things as we go forward. We want to make sure that we're not taking knee-jerk reactions to particular events that might create further problems down the road. And that's the importance of doing these detailed studies on a very scientific and engineering basis. But yeah, we'll continue to try to address flooding where we can. Certainly we do that now. We'll continue to do that.
So sort of in a related, so I know some roads are state roads, not county roads. Yeah. So how do you see the interaction, with solving problems that involve state and county roads?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of stakeholders in this process, certainly. We have a core team that's made up of DEP, Montgomery County DOT, Park and Planning, Emergency Management, and Permitting Services. But we have a number of other entities, including state entities like State Highway Administration, WSST, that are involved in this process, know what's going on. We will be working with in the future. I see a question in the chat about how do municipalities play into this role. They're important entities. Watersheds don't respect political boundaries, so we'll certainly be working with municipalities to make sure when we do assessments that we're understanding the situation in the municipality, how activity outside the municipality may affect the municipality, and how activity in the municipality may affect areas outside the municipality. So coordination with entities like State Highway and all the others I mentioned is going to be critical to this process for sure. Yeah.
So one other point to make, and Stan, you already mentioned it, but to your first part of your question, Karen, to do the studies on a watershed basis and come up with that understanding of risk on a watershed basis will provide the county with the information to make those decisions for like implementing this type of mitigation versus this type, and what kind of level of service are you getting from that? And, what is your performance? What are you getting? What value are you getting back in terms of mitigation and risk reduction for the expenditure? So the intent is to move towards that watershed level information so that, a particular alternative can be vetted technically and also have a good solid basis for, moving forward in a CIP, whether that's county or jurisdiction or whatever the case is.
Okay. I know there's some questions in the chat. I think, Tom, you had a question. You had your hand up, so I'll go to you, and then I might go to the chat for a few questions.
Yeah, thank you. No, I appreciate as well that actually the question I just maybe will emphasize what was just raised about the state coordination, because We are in the Glenwood community near NIH, near Bethesda. And Miranda, your slide with the September 10th, 2020 event was really shocking here. We just, complete flooding, and we've been talking to the DOT. Montgomery County. It's been, very constructive conversation, but it's been a two plus years now. And the main stumbling block has really been that, a lot of the water comes from Old Georgetown Road, which they say is a state maintained road. So, the challenge there has just been, how do you get momentum and fixing some of the issues around inlets and other sorts of solutions. So I just I was going to stress that point. It was already brought up about, bringing in the state and making sure we coordinate with them, because it seems like it's been difficult in that process. And then the other thing they brought up in that context is that there were a few solutions might have been like, there's a traffic island that could be reconfigured, but there's a lot of utilities located there, and how do you navigate that sort of process? And so I'm just wondering too, I just want to put on the table, some of these utilities, I don't know, I'm sure that a lot of it is very complicated, but also to make sure that those stakeholders are involved as well. But appreciate you guys doing this effort. And we're an example of one of those communities that was just shocked by that event on this September 10th. And, we submitted the data for your survey, and we hope that it causes some change in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. One thing I should mention, Montgomery County is not the only entity that's recognized this as a problem. One of the entities that is the state of Maryland. So there was a piece of legislation that was adopted in the General Assembly a couple of years ago that directed MDE to start to look more closely at flooding. For a long time, we've had a stormwater permit that focused on water quality issues, very important topic, protecting our water quality. But the state has recognized that flooding is a growing problem across the state. It affects water quality, but also has significant impacts from the standpoint of property protection and life. And so they have a process ongoing now at the state level, a number of working groups to try to figure out how the state should change their rules and regulations around flooding, and how they would like local jurisdictions to report the work they're doing on flooding. So the state definitely recognizes this, and as a result of that, SHA and other state agencies are certainly being brought into that process as well. So I think there clearly are lots of opportunities and lots of need to coordinate, but I think there's a recognition across the landscape of state and local entities that are involved in this that we need to work together.
Okay, thanks, Dan. So I'm gonna maybe just go over to some of the questions in the chat. So there was that question about municipalities, and I think, Stan, you've answered it. I'll just ask if there were any additional sort of clarifications from Randy or Dan who were interested in the municipalities part of this and how we're working with them. All right. Next one is, how are you engaging lower income and disadvantaged areas of the county in these conversations?
In phase one, in any case, we have some outreach that we've done to really get the word out on the survey. So our sub-consultant that's here, Inspire Green, has assisted in taking, written and translated material to various areas throughout the county that we've identified to reach populations that aren't going to, have the time to show up to a Zoom call potentially, or that might need that language support that we would not be able to as easily provide in this setting. So that has been done to kind of get the word out on the survey. The survey has been through some really great county services, translated into 7 different languages, I believe, including English. And I know Inspire Green was just telling us earlier today that we have used every language of the materials when we've been handing those out. So that's been a really great part. Obviously, we can always do more, but it's like Stan has said, it's a first step. The county will be continuing that type of engagement in the future, but we really hope to see those results in the survey.
I would just add, more generally, in all the climate work we're doing, we are endeavoring to figure out different ways to connect with communities. Typically, county government has developed programs or initiatives and gone to the community and explained what we're doing. But we haven't always been working together with the communities that are affected by events like flooding or by county activities and programs to try to what we refer to as co-create solutions or co-create communications. And so we're really working to do that across all our climate work. It's challenging, but we're committed to doing that. We've partnered with a lot of different agencies across the county government, but also working with community-based organizations to try to collaborate with them again on this co-creation process. And so that will be for all the flooding, all the climate work we're doing will be a principle we're hoping to utilize, and that will include the flooding work we're talking about here.
Thank you. I've got a next question. Are the sub-watershed maps available for municipalities?
So, oh yeah,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I'm just thinking in terms of the mapping we have, it's covering the entire county. So the watershed boundaries are defined based on USGS standards and, oh, I'm sorry, once again, lost my light. And include those municipalities where it, or just other municipalities where it makes sense. So I don't know if that answers the question, but there are, they are included.
Yeah, and we have, certainly the county has lots of data about watersheds and sub-watersheds. The larger municipalities like Rockville and Gaithersburg, Tacoma Park, they have data of their own, but we work with them closely and share data. Again, watersheds don't respect political boundaries, so we want to make sure we're sharing information. And as we move forward doing more detailed studies, that we're coordinating closely with municipalities because the solutions are not going to be either in the county or in the municipality. They're going to have to be in both places. And so that'll be something we'll definitely be focused on going forward.
All right. So next question is, how do these efforts connect, relate to updates of flood maps? And when will the flood maps be updated?
Yeah, so those flood maps are, the acronym is DFIRM. That stands for Digital Flood Insurance Rate Maps. They're done by FEMA. I think Miranda mentioned the last ones in the county were updated in 2006. There is a current update being done now. My understanding is that those maps are going to be available for review by the jurisdiction either toward the end of this year or first part of next year. The schedule's shifted a little bit since since we first talked about them, but they're imminent, those maps. And when they're produced for a jurisdiction, the jurisdiction reviews them and works with FEMA to comment on them and to make sure they're correct before they're published. But they should be available within the next few months, I'm told.
And from a detailed study perspective, that information would be, incorporated, and that work that has been done would be informing the study in the areas where it's relevant.
All right. So next question from Lisa Miller. Will decisions about mitigation efforts be made solely based on the areas of highest risk or through a combination of risk and other vulnerability factors of the areas?
Yeah, so one of the things we're working on with Jacobs and with the core team is trying to come up with a prioritization matrix so we can consider different factors when we go to do the next phase of the work. One of the things, obviously, risk to critical infrastructure facilities is important, but we're also interested in vulnerable communities. So for example, one of our primary factors we'll be looking at is using measures like the CDC Social Vulnerability Index, which measures a number of things about communities that suggest that the community may have challenges in addressing being prepared for flooding or recover from flooding. So though, looking at areas that have a high score under that rubric that CDC has, the Social Vulnerability Index, that'll be a major factor that we include in prioritizing areas for further study. We actually are working now with the Army Corps of Engineers to do some initial watershed-based studies. And one of the factors we used in suggesting some areas to them to do studies is the social vulnerability index. And so we've got 3 watersheds in the eastern part of the county that are included in some areas that they're currently evaluating for assessment. And Lisa, if that doesn't fully address your question, please let me know.
Okay. Next one is from Dan. Can you speak briefly to gray infrastructure standards changing? I.e. today, I believe storm drains are geared for a 10-year storm. Are those standards changing, or could they?
I think they could. That's definitely one of the things we're going to look at as part of this study, not only storm drain standards, but other building codes, stormwater management standards, and a variety of building codes to try to make sure that we are, in the future, when we're developing or redeveloping, we are putting in infrastructure that is better suited to the changing conditions we expect. Now, obviously, putting in storm drain infrastructure in a new development that can handle a bigger storm that ties into an old storm drain system doesn't solve the problem. So you can see how this is complex, but we certainly are going to look at what standards might need to be changed and how we can do that in a way that doesn't make the problem worse.
Okay. Next question. This is an interesting one. I'm not sure how to handle it. It says, could the attendees please identify themselves and their association to the county or municipality and drainage area watershed they live in or work in? I guess my reaction is I'm not sure I'm comfortable having everybody introduce themselves from the public. Obviously, if it makes sense, we can introduce again the people from the county staff or consultant team. Stan, I don't know what your view is.
I'm sure we can. I'm not sure if the question is asking people who ask questions to maybe identify their interest, but certainly, I'm from the Montgomery County Department of Environmental Protection. Miranda's with the Jacobs team. Paul's with the Jacobs team, and we have others from the county on there. Yeah, I guess I'd ask Vern to chime in here.
May I? Yeah, I just wanted to, I got here late, and I just wanted to know who lives in what watershed, because we in Tacoma Park have a group called Tacoma Stormwater Solutions, and we did a survey, and we were working independently before you guys came along. And I just want to know who's in what other watersheds and what they're doing. Just trying to get a community more sense of who's who.
Ah, got you. Okay. Yeah, I think
it's being done on the chat. So.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think many people who are involved are more than happy to let you know.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
We do have a lot of watershed groups around the county that are looking at these issues. So, and I think very collaborative with one another. So happy to do that. Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Will the study plan consider the flooding and projections risks from the insurance industry, which are becoming available on the web?
So I think we'll use, I'm not sure, Stephen, particularly what data you're referring to, but I think we would use, as we go forward, we'd use every available data point that we can to try to make sure what we're doing is addressing the problem as efficiently and effectively as possible. I would imagine that some of the flooding projections that insurance companies use are based on the kind of detailed analysis that we're going to be doing here in the county. My assumption is they probably look to things like updating of floodplain maps to update their requirements around insurance, and so we'll not only have updated floodplain maps, but we'll have much more information about this urban or pluvial flooding that Miranda talked about in the slide.
All right. Next question is, what improvements have been made where the young man lost his life in Rockville last year?
Yeah. So my understanding is that the apartments on the lower level of that complex the building that flooded where the young man lost his life, those apartments are not being rented. That property is in kind of a bowl, and that was the problem that occurred with that significant storm in the Rockville area in September of 2021. It overtopped the storm drain there and flowed down into this bowl area where that apartment complex is built. And there's no guarantee that that wouldn't happen again. So those apartments are, my understanding, are not being rented in that area. Whether we can do long-term improvements to improve the storm drain capacity there or not is something that we'd have to do more research on, because again, it's a big network that connects a lot of different areas together. So that's the steps that have been taken thus far, as I know.
All right. Next one is, maybe this is off topic, but do homeowners need to implement basement waterproofing to address increased flooding, and what techniques are most effective?
Yeah, I think there are measures that homeowners can take if they have flooding on their property. I'm not an expert in homeowner flooding improvements, so I wouldn't want to give anybody particular advice on that. There are companies out there that do that kind of work, and I think that's going to be on a very site-specific basis. But there certainly are things you can do, whether it's waterproofing or rain gardens, as we talked about earlier, or just channeling water away from foundations, that sort of thing that can take, that people can take. But again, there are companies out there that can help homeowners identify solutions to particular problems they may be experiencing.
I'd say too that FEMA, so the Federal Emergency Management Administration, they offer like on floodsmart.gov, which I think we may have a link to in a moment. But they do offer a little bit of guidance for homeowners in terms of what they can do, and waterproofing and that kind of thing as well. I can put the link in the chat.
All right, thank you. The next one is what's been the response to the survey? Are you getting a lot of responses? I think it was 560 responses as of today.
That's correct.
I remembered correctly. All right. So yeah, I mean, I think we feel like it's given us a lot of good information, and obviously the more, we'd like to see that. So, and I think just on that specifically, part of the pop-ups that we've done, that our team has done, is also helped encourage people to go to that survey, and handing out flyers and information about this study. So that I think may have also been helpful. Hung from from Inspire Green, noted that usually right after we were at a pop-up, the number of people that went on and did the survey went up quite a bit, like, the next day. So that was good to see. All right. Keep going on. The other question that continues to come up in our community that was impacted by the September 2020 flood was, what can the county do to influence the tear downs that continue to happen where large lots are taken over by hardscape and do not absorb rain?
Yeah, so this is a question that has been asked for a number of years. People have talked about, commonly referred to as mansionization, and that some people consider that a derogatory term, but there have been lots of discussion about that among policymakers. The council's debated that issue. Some policies have been adopted around amount of impervious surface the percentage of impervious surface on a property. This, I think, is something that will be raised as part of this study, as something the county may want to revisit, about what sort of limits do we put in place, or what kind of increased stormwater control measures we might put in place. But we don't have any specific recommendations right now that we're prepared to make at this point. And again, this will be the subject to some debate with the county council, I'm sure. There's always trade-offs when you make those kind of policies.
All right. Does the county have a mechanism to create and work on projects on both public and private property in an integrated manner, such as what the town of Somerset is currently doing.
So I'm not completely familiar with what the town of Somerset is doing, but sounds like it might be enlightening for the group here to hear about that.
I can comment on that. And Tacoma Stormwater Solutions has done 2 webinars, and David Reed got in touch with people from Somerset. It took 2 voting cycles to get a new town council that agreed to put $300,000 towards the most severe problem in the little town, using the backyards of the property owners who all agreed, and it's a model for a public-private partnership, basically. We were very happy to have the woman, I can't remember her name, Steve or Randy, help me out here, and they presented on our webinar, and they worked with both LIDC, Neil Weinstein, and another group that I'm not remembering, late in the day. But anyway, it looks like something that's promising, and there's a model already there. Thank you.
Yeah, I saw an interesting white paper the other day that used an example in Tacoma Park as a potential program that involved public money to help offset the costs for private homeowners that agree to take stormwater control measures. This was a situation where the example was 5 houses, one at the top of the hill and going down to the bottom of the hill, the 5th house, and how each property contributes in some way to that problem, but the ones at the bottom of the hill bear the brunt of the issues. And so this was about how to make sure that everybody's fairly contributing to that, and having whatever the local jurisdiction is help with some of the financial aspects of that and help maybe mediate that solution. So I thought that was an interesting approach.
I'm glad you saw that. David Reed was the author. It's called Payment for Environmental Services, and he's part of our group, Tacoma Stormwater Solutions.
Yeah. So I thought that was an interesting approach, and I'm sure that's the kind of thing that we'll want to look at. We've been very focused in the climate work on energy efficiency and renewable energy, and so we've developed entities like the Montgomery County Green Bank to help make more attractive financing available for energy efficiency, renewable energy projects. I could see something like that being developed around stormwater and flooding solutions.
All right, David Reed, I see your hand up, and since you were mentioned, maybe you were going to tag on to this discussion.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. That document, Payment for Environmental Services, is available on the Tacoma Stormwater Solution website. And we are actively exploring options with Somerset and other municipalities and areas to actually implement payment for environmental services. So we're available, and certainly look forward to working with you, the county, and others to explore this option. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right. I'm going to keep going down the questions here. Will the county consider requiring existing buildings, including homes, to be brought up to current new build stormwater control code, possibly at the time of transfer of ownership, so as not to impose a financial burden on the current owners?
Yeah, again, I think this is one of those policy questions that the county may consider as we go forward, trying to identify changes in the current laws and codes that apply to development and stormwater management and flooding control. We don't have a proposal to do this yet, but that's certainly an example of an option that might come to pass.
Yeah, this is Ken. The reason I put that in there is because, we're covered on new build. I mean, arguably the current stormwater control, code is woefully inadequate. But if you think about, the new build is maybe, a fraction of a percent of, the land area in the county, it's already built out. And really the problem is the existing structures, right?
Yeah, I think so. New building has more stringent stormwater management requirements, but again, that's typically based on water quality related issues. Now, there is some quantity control with those new standards, but that doesn't mean that water's not running off those properties. So I think while new building may have more stormwater controls, it's not inadequate. It's not adequate for significant storms. So I'm not arguing with you, Ken, that the significant part of our issue is there's a lot of development already out there, but I think we're going to have to look at both new and existing development to try to solve this problem or minimize this problem, I should say.
Yeah, agreed. Thanks.
All right. I see that, yeah, you're right. A number of people have been putting their name and affiliation in the chat, so appreciate that. And then Anna put that link to the watershed map. So if you're not sure which watershed you're in, you can go to that and put in your address. So that's helpful. Thank you, Anna. Let's see, I'm going to the next question. Does the county have the authority to prevent new construction or rebuilding with a larger footprint in the same location?
So again, there certainly are regulations which govern how redevelopment can occur. I don't know specifically all the ins and outs of those regulations, but they do place controls on the amount of impervious, the percentage of impervious area on a property, depending upon the lot size and things like that, the zoning. But that is something that I think we'll probably revisit as part of this process. Yeah. I also just I noted that Delegate Al Carr has put his name in the chat. They appreciate the delegate participating tonight. The state obviously can play a big role in helping address flooding, and so we're happy to have him on the call tonight.
All right. Let's see. There's this, I think people just commenting on locations or the watersheds. I see a comment here, town of Chevy Chase will be getting the survey link soon. So I guess you mean our survey. I'm assuming, Dan, and that's great. And then I echo the concern about exceptions to stormwater management requirements that seem to occur frequently on new builds. I don't know if Stan, you want to say anything about exceptions or any of that specific?
Yeah, one of those folks who've been involved in stormwater issues for a long time are familiar with what are called stormwater waivers, stormwater requirement waivers. That's a controversial topic. There's some school of thought that if you didn't allow the waiver to be issued, the building couldn't go forward, the development couldn't go forward. And some people think that's a good idea. Some people say redevelopment's important, and renewal of the county infrastructure is important. And one of the things you get when you do rebuild, even if you give a stormwater waiver, is you're getting more stormwater than the existing building was already there. And I think there's some truth to probably both those points of view. Again, it's not a simple issue, and one that, again, I think will be part of the big one of the many issues that we discuss as we look for changes to our regulatory requirements, building codes, things like that.
Just one follow-up on the stormwater waivers. Everything you said obviously makes a lot of sense. Just to provide some context, those waivers are for water quality events that are generally on the order of like a 1-year event. So just to put it in perspective, they're for not to in any way say that they're not an important facet, they totally are, but it is a relatively small quantity that those structures are managing.
Fill the first half inch.
Right.
Okay. Alcar asked the question, is there a countywide advisory board or commission that has jurisdiction over flooding issues?
There currently is not. We have lots of boards and commissions in the county, but we don't have one related to flooding. It wouldn't surprise me if maybe something like that is developed. We certainly, over the course of the last year or so, as we've gotten, as we've embarked on this work, we've certainly developed a group within the county government, representatives from departments and agencies across the county government that are coordinating on these issues, including the development of this plan. But it wouldn't surprise me to see that expanded to include representatives of municipalities and from the public and from business community and other entities that obviously are going to play a role in in mitigating flooding and are affected by flooding. So, but we don't currently have such a board or commission.
All right. And then last question we have here is erosion and damage to stream valleys and adjacent parks a critical factor in identifying focus of attention?
Yeah, so we're still working on this prioritization schema that I talked about earlier, but protection of environmental resources is certainly one of the attributes that we're looking at. So when this study is released, we'll see some recommendations from the consulting team about how we might want to prioritize things. And I think one of the discussions we'll have in the county is looking at the various evaluation factors, and different people are going to have different viewpoints on which ones are more important than others, but that'll be part of the discussion we have going forward as we move into the second phase of this work. But protection of environmental resources is definitely a factor that we're considering.
All right. I think I've captured all the questions in the chat. I'll open it up again and see if there's any questions or clarifications or anything else somebody wants to bring up before we close out the meeting this evening.
I would say too, so we do have those breakout group questions, just in case you had any thoughts or opinions on those. The three at the end there, 3, 4, and 5, however, really like to direct you to the survey if you've not already filled it out, just so that we're capturing it, in that format as well, which will be really ideal for looking at it comprehensively. But we're very happy to discuss those too. But thank you.
Yeah, Hung, if you could go to I think it's the second to last slide, maybe we just summarizes some of the resources and yeah, maybe let's stop here for a minute. Let's just talk about next steps. So we are, we're, as I mentioned, we're working toward this list of recommendations and data that the consulting team and county agencies are gathering as part of this study. And this first phase again focuses on governance, resources, funding, how to prioritize additional studies. This information we're collecting here tonight and through the survey and through our other outreach events will help us more accurately characterize past events, but also help us prioritize future work. So that's where we're headed next. Can you go to the next slide, please, Hung? So here, I just wanted to make sure that we put that survey link up again. Again, you can get it, perhaps the easiest way to get it. You can scan the QR code right there if you want, but if you go to our website, montgomerycountymd.gov/flooding, there's the link to the survey as well as the other information that's on the website. One of the things that the county currently has is Alert Montgomery. If you're not signed up for that, there's a link there to that. You can get alerts about lots of different things, not just flooding, but other storm events, traffic issues. On this, when you sign up for Alert Montgomery, you can pick the kind of things you want to be notified about. And those can be sent to you via email or text. So it's a very useful tool to stay tuned to emergency and other events in the county. And we put down there a website that has some information about flood risk mapping. That's the Maryland Flood Maps page. So again, another source of information there. Hung, if you could just go to the last slide, I just want to put up, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to send me an email. You see my email there. Welcome to call me as well. Email might be the best way to get a hold of me, and I'll certainly reach back out. But feel free to call that number. Frank Dawson, who's one of my colleagues in DEP, is also co-managing this effort, and there's his contact information as well. I saw a couple other questions come up there, Paul. You were probably going to go back to them.
Yep, I was going to do that, and I see Ken's got his hand up, but the few questions that popped up here. How can the county help when I got it lost? How can the county help when a municipality is not adequately preparing for flooding and / drought that may accompany climate change?
Well, we certainly want to work with municipalities. I guess, David, if you want to, you can send me an email, and if you don't want to call out the municipality here, you can send me an email, but we want to work with every municipality. This problem, again, is not confined by political boundaries. So everybody who lives in a municipality is also a Montgomery County resident, and that's who we work for. So we're equal opportunity, whether you're in a municipality or outside a municipality.
All right. What's the cost of the study?
Yeah, so this first phase we're doing is right around $500,000. The subsequent phases of the study remain to be seen. That'll depend on the extent of the areas we study and how in depth we have to go, what level of data we currently have about a particular area, how much data we have to collect. I mentioned that as City of Alexandria, where they identified some solutions, the first phase of those solutions are quite expensive, $170 million in their first phase and that you can find that on the City of Alexandria website if you're interested. So again, this will not be an inexpensive endeavor for the county, but it's much more, as with most things like this, you're better off preparing and planning ahead rather than trying to recover, because we know the cost of recovery is much more expensive than trying to prevent it.
All right. And yeah, there's a question about the presentation. Yeah, we'll make sure that is placed on the website so people can refer back to it and download it or do whatever they would like. Has the county identified and assessed the value and services provided by what's called ecosystem services in our stream valleys?
Yeah, we recognize there's the stream valleys provide a lot of those ecosystem services. I don't think we have a thorough evaluation of their value and all the services they're provided. One of the things that we had received some funding for in last year's operating budget was to do to invest in tools that allow us to better understand the value of what are called nature-based solutions, which are natural practices to address things like flooding or heat island effect, and certainly our stream valleys provide a lot of those kind of benefits. So I think we'll develop some more tools to be able to do that. We don't have all that information now, but that's certainly something that we want to protect our stream valleys. They're important for many reasons in the county.
Okay, will the county consider buying out frequently flooded properties, including those in the floodplains?
Again, I think that'll be a policy issue that will be discussed as these new floodplain maps come out. I think we're going to find more properties in floodplains, and whether the county will buy out properties or evaluate different ways to address the financial concerns that creates. That's going to be a policy discussion with policymakers in the county.
Can I just add, this Ken, that was my question, and I'll just give you an example. A woman I know called me over to her house. She was flooded out, and her house was, I'm not kidding, about a foot above the level of the stream at normal base flow. I never would have bought the house, but without saying I agree with her, her argument to me was, well, 50 years ago, the county let her build at that location. And now she said, this is what she said to me, and the county is now allowed uncontrolled development upstream with all the impervious surfaces. And now that's what's causing her house to flood. So I'm just saying that's an interesting argument. Leave it at that.
Yep. Yeah, it will be an interesting discussion for sure, Ken. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, next one. Thanks DEP for leading on the stormwater volume challenges. About costs, will transportation agencies get on board to help with the costs given all the impervious roads?
Yeah, we partner significantly with our local Montgomery County Department of Transportation. Again, we've talked about state highway. I think the transportation agencies are going to be as invested in this work as anybody, because it is their infrastructure that is often flooded and needs to be protected, whether you're talking about roads or bikeways or mass transit systems. So I think they will they're full partners in trying to address this problem going forward.
All right. I think that's all the questions I see. Any other final comments, or otherwise we can close out the meeting? Again, I'll say from my perspective, this has been very, I think, informative. Hopefully everybody's been able to ask their questions. Appreciate everybody's participation. It looked like we had, I don't know, at one point 37 or 38 folks on the participating. So that's great to see. And as Stan said, this is just the beginning of the process.
Please
Yeah.
send the survey to your friends too.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and from the county's perspective, thanks to everybody's participation, and please, yes, spread the survey link far and wide, and the more information we get, the better off we all are. Thanks.
Exactly. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks.
Take care. Thank you.